the Renaissance and the Reformation. So we'll be talking about both of them in detail later on, but first, I have a question for you. What were some of the main features of the Renaissance and the Reformation? Here, let's take a look at these pictures here. All the way on the left, we have a picture from the classical world. With the Renaissance, we saw an emergence, a re-emergence, or a rebirth in the interest in the classical world. Very famous philosophers such as Plato, Socrates, came back in and played important parts in the formation of ideas in the Renaissance. We also saw an emergence in the interest in the human form, like we see in this picture done by Leonardo da Vinci. The human form and the human body became an important part of the artwork and the ideas during the Renaissance. And lastly, this picture on the left of Martin Luther reminds us of the Reformation and the changes that Martin Luther put in place that came in with the Protestant Reformation. So we'll be talking about all of this and more when we get to the passage, but first, let's have a look at the keywords we'll be using today. Now let's have a look at the keywords we'll be using today. Here, both of these pictures are from the Middle Ages. On the left, we have a king and his knights protecting his city. And on the right, we have a king valiantly sitting on his throne. Now, during the Middle Ages, the society was feudalistic. It acted out under feudalism. Feudalism is a social structure where kings, like this one here on the right, are all the way on the top with the rest of the nobility. Under them is the knights, and on the bottom is the rest of society, the rest of the peasants. It forms a basic triangle because most of the people were peasants, all the way down on the bottom of the pyramid. Moving right along here to our next word, Black Death. Now both of these pictures are pictures showing the causes, the Black Death that spread all over Europe during the Middle Ages. Here we have a woman who's passed away being put into a cart. And on the right, some people who have fallen ill and laying in the street. Both of these images were common during the Middle Ages because the Black Death was so severe. Many people died because of this disease. Moving along, here on the left we have people making books with movable type. Now, movable type is a way to make metal into shapes of words or letters and then stamp them on paper. This way of making books, printing books, allowed to speed up print production and allowed it to be much cheaper. Before movable type, before the ability to move the letters around and just simply stamp them with a large press, works had to be rewritten by hand. So now we have works like this that could be printed and published really quickly. This sped up the movement of information around Europe. First, we had movable type in Germany, and then when it went to other areas around Europe, information could spread much faster. Books could be printed much more quickly and at a much wider scale. So this sped up information being moved around. To speed up simply means to increase the speed, to go faster. Moving along, here on the left we have Martin Luther, the man who led the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation was the time when the Protestant religion formed, when Protestantism formed. the Protestants broke off from the church and started their own religion because they had disagreements with the church. Now, one disagreement that they had dealt with indulgence. At this time, the church was selling indulgences, forgiveness for money. Now, usually the church wouldn't sell indulgence for money. Indulgence is forgiveness, and they would give out forgiveness. They would give out forgiveness for money. Normally it wouldn't do this, but the church needed money, so it started selling this. Martin Luther, this man here, got angry and wrote 95 theses. A thesis is his argument. He wrote 95 arguments against the church. He took his arguments and he nailed them onto a church like this one here. To nail something is simply to take a nail and hit it with a hammer. To nail it up, you can nail it up on a wall, you can nail it down on the floor. Simply the act of putting a nail through something and hammering it. Now, with the Protestant Reformation and the rise of Martin Luther, many different sects form. A sect you can think of as a small group that breaks off from a main branch of a religion and have slightly different ideas. Moving along, here we have two pictures of two different men. On the left, we have Peter Paul Rubens, and on the right, Erasmus. Now, Peter Paul Rubens, some people think he was a humanist. Now, a humanist is a person who focuses mainly on the human body and the world around us. They don't think too much about the life outside, the supernatural life. Think only about human life and the world here on earth. Some people think he was a humanist, others disagree. However, this man on the right definitely was a humanist, Erasmus. He was actually a priest, a very religious person. However, he was also a humanist. He was concerned deeply about the world around him. Well, now keep these words in mind when we get into the passage, because we've wrapped up here, so let's read. Let's read. From the Middle Ages to the Reformation. The Roman Empire had controlled all of the land along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea and most places in Europe. Under the Pax Romana, Rome's soldiers had kept the peace for centuries. After the vast Roman Empire collapsed in 476, Rome suffered almost constant war. The period between the fall of Rome and the 1400s is called the Middle Ages. For most Europeans, life was hard during the Middle Ages. Medieval society was like a pyramid based on feudalism. The kings and lords were on top, the knights were below them, and the peasants or serfs were on the bottom. People suffered from terrible wars, and hunger and diseases killed thousands of people. There were few advances in science, literature, art, and other fields. However, for the Christian church, the Middle Ages were a time of growth. Since Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire in 313, the church continued to expand even after the Western Roman Empire collapsed. By the year 1000, most Europeans were Christians, and the church dominated people's daily lives. This is why the Middle Ages is sometimes called the Age of Faith. In the 1300s, a plague called the Black Death struck Europe. It killed millions of people. The deaths of so many people changed Europe's economy and sped up the end of feudalism in Europe. So many serfs died that lords had to pay workers on their manors. So just to point out a few key facts here about the Middle Ages, it lasted from the fall of Rome to 1400. Medieval society was a feudal society. Christian church expanded and dominated people's daily lives. It was very involved. The Black Death killed many and sped up the end of feudalism and the change of Europe's economy. Around 1400, the Middle Ages came to an end, and the Renaissance began in Italy. The word Renaissance means rebirth. During this period, people began to rediscover and value art, science, literature, and the ideas of ancient Greece and Rome. This led them to make new discoveries of their own. Humanists led the way. They studied ancient Greek and Roman writings and focused on humans more than religion. There were numerous advances made in science, art, literature, music, and other fields. People like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo became Renaissance men, men with curiosity and talents in many fields. The Renaissance spread throughout Europe. During it, there was one important invention that greatly altered society. It was the printing press. Johann Gutenberg invented movable type in the 1450s. His invention made books more accessible. Books became cheaper and easier to make. So more people learned to read. This let more people read the Bible for themselves. Previously, only priests and the rich could read. But now, common people could read the Bible and come up with their own interpretations of it. This helped lead to the Protestant Reformation. It's an interesting thing, this movable type is, because before the movable type, all books had to be rewritten by hand. If books were to be copied, they had to be rewritten by somebody. But movable type allowed books to be made multiple times very, very quickly. Also, because of multiple type, books could be mass-produced very, very quickly, and they could be cheaper, more abundant, more accurate, more consistent. Why more accurate and more consistent? Well, if somebody's rewriting something, there's a chance they might make a mistake, or they might make changes of their own without making any notice to the reader. Also, more people had chances to read, and they had more chances where they could learn to read. So the spread of education came along with movable type. During the Renaissance, the Catholic Church still had great power. Some popes and bishops became powerful political leaders, powerful political rulers. But Martin Luther, a German priest, thought that the church was too corrupt. He was especially upset that the church sold indulgences to rebuild St. Peter's Church in Rome. In 1517, he went to a church and nailed a paper with 95 theses on it. His actions resulted in the Protestant Reformation. Many others felt the same as Luther. They thought the church needed to be reformed. The ideas of the Reformation rapidly spread from Germany to Switzerland, the Netherlands, France, and England. More people left the Catholic Church and founded their own Christian sects. Even King Henry VIII of England split with the Catholic Church and established the Anglican Church in the 1530s. The Lutheran, Presbyterian, and Anabaptist sects were all founded during this time. Wow, great job reading along with me. Whew, that was a long one. Now go back and review. And when you're ready, let's move on to the checkup. Are you ready? All right then, let's have a look at the checkup. Question 1. Why is the Middle Ages sometimes called the Age of Faith? Is it because A, there were few advances in science, literature, art, and other fields? B, the church dominated people's lives and most Europeans were Christian by the year 1000 AD? Or C, the Catholic Church sold indulgences to people in order to get money to rebuild a church? Or D, more people left the Catholic Church and founded their own Christian sects? What was the reason or reasons why the Middle Ages is sometimes called the Age of Faith? The answer here is B. The church dominated people's lives, and most Europeans were Christians during that time. People converted and Christianity spread out all over Europe. People used the faith as a way to get through the hard times. Question 2. Which of the following helped speed up the end of feudalism in Europe? Is it A, Gutenberg invented the movable type? B, humanists led the way in making new discoveries? C, the Black Death killed millions and lords had to pay serfs to work? D, only priests and very rich people could afford to buy books and learn how to read? What's the answer here? That's right, C. The Black Death killed millions and lords had to pay serfs to work. Up until then, lords didn't have to pay serfs to work. But because so many people were dying, the lords then had to pay people to work to keep them there instead of going elsewhere to find work and food. Question 3. What was not one effect that movable type had on society? A, books became cheaper. B, books became a lot easier to make. C, common people could read the Bible and come up with their own interpretations. Or D, the rebirth and interest in the ideas of ancient Greece and Rome. Which was not one effect? The answer here is D, the rebirth and interest in the ideas of ancient Greece and Rome. This was one effect that led to the Renaissance, but it is not one thing that was caused by the movable type. Movable type led to cheaper books and the widespread, or the more widespread, of information around Europe. Now for true or false questions. Question 4. The Middle Ages was a very hard time for people because they suffered from terrible wars, hunger, and diseases. Is this A, true, or B, false? That's right, this is A, true. During the Middle Ages, people had a hard time because terrible wars swept over Europe. People were hungry because they could not buy or grow enough food, and diseases like the Black Death killed many people. Question 5. Martin Luther, like Leonardo da Vinci, was a Renaissance man. Is this A, true, or B, false? This is B, false. Martin Luther was not a Renaissance man like Leonardo da Vinci. Martin Luther was a specialist in his field only. He believed deeply about his religion and helped to bring change to it with the Protestant Reformation. Now on to fill in the blank questions. Question 6. During the Middle Ages, society was based on blank with kings on the top and peasants on the bottom. Which answer best fits in the blank? Is it A, humanism, B, Protestantism, C, interpretations, or D, feudalism? What's the answer here? Yes, that's right. It is D, feudalism. Feudalism was a kind of society where kings were on the top, knights were underneath them, and peasants were left on the bottom. Very few people were on the top with privileges. Question 7. To raise money, the church sold blank. Which answer best fits in the blank? Is it A, indulgences, B, interpretations, C, movable type, or D, sex? The answer here is A, indulgences. The church sold indulgences for money to raise profit for themselves. An indulgence is forgiveness for a sin or bad act. The church sold forgiveness to raise money to help build churches. Now on to our last question, question 8. After Martin Luther nailed his 95 theses on a church, many different blank formed. Which answer best fits in the blank? Is it A, humanists, B, sex, C, Black Death, or D, movable types? The answer that best fits in the blank here is B, sex. After Martin Luther nailed his 95 theses on a church, the Protestant Reformation began, and many different sects formed, many different kinds of Christian faiths bloomed and formed. Protestantism was one of them. Wow, great job with the checkup. I hope you had a very fun time learning about the Renaissance and Reformation. It's a very interesting topic. Now, study hard, and until next time, bye-bye.